Good evening, everybody. Thank you for your attendance tonight. And good evening for those who are watching online or participating online. I think the YouTube recording has commenced. So tonight is the overview and scrutiny services, where we are examining or making comments on the LPP2. And we're here as a scrutiny function to provide comments and observations. I said at the last meeting that all meetings will conclude at 9 p.m. at the very latest, and that will happen tonight. I am hoping we won't be that long, that the comments can be made, and then we can at least have some of the evening to ourselves. Just before we start, I'm going to, at the end, recommend a change in the recommendations. I have to admit, I'm not particularly happy on the way they're wording, and our function as a scrutiny compared to the actual recommendations. So I will come out with just some very simple additional words that hopefully we can all agree on. Okay, so if we go to the agenda, please, everybody. So item number 1, Kim, have we any apologies for absence and substitutions?
Thank you. Yes, we have apologies from absence from Councillor Marriott, Councillor Dixon and Councillor Wicks. Councillor Dixon and Councillor Marriott have joined us on Zoom, but just unfortunately cannot attend the meeting in person.
Yes, apologies, Chairman. We should have had a 5-hour PCR test, which should have allowed me to come into the chamber this evening, but it hasn't arrived, so I have to attend by Zoom.
Okay, thank you for that. Obviously, if we do need to vote on anything, the legislation is it can only be the people who are present. Declarations of interest.
I have not received any declarations prior to the meeting, Chairman.
Thank you. Questions from members of the public?
We have had one question submitted by Mr. Mike Baldry of Hazelmere. The question is, the council is aware of Hazelmere Town Council's representations that it supports the allocation of the Royal School within LPP2, but only on the basis of a limited development of 90 units only, being on land on which there were previously constructed buildings or hardstanding. The leader confirmed at the full council meeting on the 22nd of September 2021 that he had responded to and would continue to listen to the community of Hazelmere as represented by Hazelmere Town Council and its neighbourhood plan. It is concerning that the officer's report on LPP2 accompanying this evening's meeting does not propose any amendments to the Royal School allocation in reflection of the requirements of the Town Council. The Town Council are clear that no development over the playing fields and green spaces of the site, being wholly within the AONB, must be permitted. Please can members amend the description of the Royal School allocation to reflect the Town Council's position. Further, Hazelmere Vision has also now stated that the numbers proposed at the school site seem high. And I believe Councillor MacLeod is going to respond to that, Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to respond on behalf of the Council. Waverley is aware that the Town Council has commented on the addendum to LPP2 that they feel that the dwellings proposed in the housing allocation for the Royal Junior School should be accommodated within the existing built-up area of the site, and also that Hazelmere Vision have stated that the numbers seem high. However, both the Town Council and Hazelmere Vision are clear in their general support for the allocation of this site for housing. Whilst it is in the AONB, the site is classified as previously developed land, and it already has a number of buildings and areas of hard standing on it, and is visually very well screened. The evidence that the Council has gathered concludes that there is a low to medium sensitivity to development in landscape terms. Taking these matters into account, Waverley considers that the number of dwellings proposed for the site in Local Plan Part 2 is appropriate, and there is no need to change the allocation. It is recognised that it will not be possible to design an acceptable scheme for the number of units that is solely contained within the footprint of the existing buildings and hard surfaced areas. However, the Council is confident that the character of the site, its size and degree of natural screening, as such that a well-designed scheme for the quantum of development as proposed in the addendum to LPP2 can be accommodated without having an adverse impact on the countryside and the ONB. Thank you, Chairman. That concludes Waver's response to Mr. Baudry's question. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I felt it was important that Mr. Baudry's question was read out rather than just be attached to the papers, as clearly that's quite a sensitive area. So thank you, Kim, for reading it out on his behalf. Okay, so if we can turn to the main part of the agenda, please, which is agenda item 5, which is pages 7 to 276. We have a number of officers here tonight and also online. So I think Graham Parrott's going to do a very quick introduction just to set the scene, and then I'll open it up for questions. So Graham, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So just to run through where we are, firstly, a brief reminder. Members will know that back in October 2020, the council agreed initially a pre-submission version of the plan for consultation, and that consultation ran from November through to January following that decision. Following a review of the representations that we received, we brought a further report through committees in September, and that was seeking to make some very specific amendments to the plan before it's submitted to examination. And those amendments were set out in the addendum. And that essentially related to the site allocations in Hazelmere, some changes to some of the numbers on some of the sites already in the plan. And as members will know, the decision to remove the Red Court site from the plan and to insert the Royal School site into the plan. And that was what was then consulted on when the council considered this back in September. Just as a reminder, the council did agree at that time that there was a schedule of minor modifications that could be submitted with the examination for examination, and also agreed that at the time of submission or leading up to submission, the head of the planning and economic development would be able to make further minor modifications, factual corrections, that sort of thing, up to the point where the plan was submitted. And finally, it was also agreed through the recommendations then that when the plan is submitted, the inspector can be invited to recommend further modifications if they're necessary to make the plan sound. So that was essentially what happened in September, and the key thing was the further consultation that took place. What were the changes? I mean, in the report, and I appreciate, by the way, that there's a lot of stuff there for members to look at. I think a significant bulk of the papers were just sending you again the pre-submission version of the plan, the one that was considered previously. So it's there more for information almost than anything else, but it is the plan as it was presented, and we've also given you the addendum, so you've got all the information in front of you. But going into the report itself, on section 5, paragraph 5.1, it does set out what those main changes were that we consulted on, which I've already mentioned. So they're just bullet pointed there, if that's helpful to members, just as a reminder as to what we were consulting on. And we did receive about 600 comments in total from, I think, a total of 221 respondents to the consultation. On page 11 in the report, there is a paragraph which 6.1, which gives a very, very high level sort of bullet point list of the sort of key issues that we have to consider, or that were coming through the representations and that we responded to. And you'll know that I think there are various annexes and that set out details of, for example, what those comments were in more detail and the officer response to those. It is probably just worth just running through what those annexes are so that you're aware of that. Well, as I said, the first annex is the original pre-submission plan. The second one was the addendum. The third annex, which is probably one of the most important ones for the purposes of tonight, runs from pages 241 to 253, and that is the annex setting out the key issues raised and the officer response. Then you also have Annex 4, a summary of the comments from specific consultation bodies. And if I may, Chairman, at that particular point, there was something brought to our attention on Friday, which is that in that Annex 4, where we refer to the comments we received from the Environment Agency, there is a list of sites where the Environment Agency were making the comment that there would need to be a mains connection for foul drainage. And unfortunately, and I apologise for this, inadvertently, one of the sites, that's the Royal School site, wasn't included in that list. That was one of the sites that the Environment Agency said would need a mains connection. So we will correct that. But I think I would want to add that that doesn't in any way change our view about the appropriateness of the site being included as an allocation. Annex 5 contains some additional minor modifications. These are ones that we've identified through the process of reviewing the representations on the consultation. So we've already agreed a schedule of minor modifications back in September. This would sit alongside that. And there is one that was omitted from the schedule in September, which was in response to Historic England's comments. There were a number of policies where we just were asked, or we decided to recommend inserting some wording to draw attention to the historic asset that would need to be considered through any planning application. And one of the sites, which is the National Trust car park site up near Branksome House in Haslemere, there is a minor modification proposed there to include a reference to, in the policy, to the need to conserve and enhance the setting of Branksome House. That minor modification was actually set out in the addendum as proposed, but it didn't appear in the schedule. So apologies for that. We will add it to the schedule. Annex 6 contains some additional modifications. And this is slightly different. These are modifications that are more than just minor ones. But so where in this particular case we would be putting them forward to the examination, assuming the council agrees to this, because they would be some further changes that we'd invite the inspector to consider. One of these is that, as members will probably know, the Haslemere neighbourhood plan did settle on a settlement boundary for Haslemere, and to ensure there's no conflict and confusion, we feel that as that's now been set, rather than having a settlement boundary also set out in local plan part 2, we should just stick with the settlement boundary that's now set out in the Haslemere neighbourhood plan. And there's also proposed a change to the boundary of the area of strategic visual importance to align with that, and that is a modification that we will put forward, assuming it's agreed by council, and invite the inspector to consider. And the second one, a similar sort of thing, there was a site in Rowledge in Farnham where at the time, I think when we were looking at setting the boundary of the ASVI, there was a planning application approved on this particular site. That lapsed, and since then there's been an application turned down on the site at appeal. And so we're proposing again a change there so that the area of strategic visual importance covers that site and aligns with the boundary in the Farnham neighbourhood plan. So they are small in the context of the whole plan, but they're not minor. So we felt they should be ones that are put forward to the examiner and invite the examiner to consider those. In the report, I think you will see there's a section where we've perhaps gone into a bit more detail about those two changes. We've also explained as the position in relation to some of the reps that we received, which were on matters not covered by the addendum, and therefore that we weren't able to take into account. And finally, Chairman, if I just go back to, we'll take members back to page 7 of the report. That is the page that, or to page 7 of the agenda papers. I think that's the one that sets out the recommendations that we're putting forward. I know, Chairman, you said you were going to comment on that later, but again, just to take you through those, we're inviting the committee to make comments and observations to the Executive and Council on the recommendations, A, that the Council agrees to submit the plan and the addendum for examination. Secondly, that the schedule of minor modifications set out in Annex 5 to the report, with the amendment I mentioned already, are also submitted for examination. Thirdly, that the inspector appointed to examine the plan is invited to consider the further 2 main modifications that I've just referred to, the ones for the Haslemere neighbour settlement boundary and the Rowledge ASVI and settlement boundary. The next recommendation was that the head of planning and economic development be authorised to formally request that the inspector recommends further modifications if they are required to make the plan sound. And that was the same approach we took with local plan part 1. And finally, that the head of planning and economic development be authorised to make any other minor modifications to the pre-submission version of the plan and the addendum prior to it being submitted. And that's, again, those changes that might just be to do with any factual updates or corrections. So, Chairman, unless there's anything else, I've got no more to say by way of introduction, and I'm obviously leaving that to members. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Graham. What I've asked Mark to do tonight is to try and keep a summary of the issues that we raise, because otherwise in the time scale before council tomorrow, which have a an overview of scrutiny the night before is not good. So Mark's going to try as best he can to do a summary, and then at the end of this meeting we will just go through those to make sure we've captured them all. So Mark, you're probably going to be fairly busy. Okay, I think we've got one question from Councillor Hyman. I guess he's online, is he?
He's on Zoom on the telephone.
Okay, and Kim, obviously, if you
Hello.
Yeah, we can.
Hello.
Tell us when you're ready to start, and we'll start the timer. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, you remember, yes, I'm ready to start. You'll remember from the last services meeting that you held, which was for Dunsfold SPD, I'd highlighted the fact that the bird numbers given in the appropriate assessment was from the 1980s, and there were no current bird numbers. There are certainly issues regarding the Dunsfold SPD's claim to have an appropriate assessment, and because there was no assessment of the mitigation and no bird numbers and no conservation object. Well, you'll appreciate that I'm coming to local plan part 2, of course. The head of planning then reported to the audit committee meeting on the 8th of November, and it's confirmed, and it's on webcast, that the evidence of the effectiveness of the mitigation isn't available. It's the next thing the council needs to do. And that's what he says in there. So we know we don't have an appropriate assessment. And he's also asked Natural England for the bird numbers, and the latest information I've had is that Natural England haven't got back to us. So, as I thought, there are serious problems with the because of the risk level to the birds. They're not even allowed to tell us what the risk is, and we're not allowed to know the bird numbers. This, of course, applies similarly to tonight's local plan part 2. We know that we don't have an appropriate assessment because the head of planning has told the audit committee that we don't have an assessment of mitigation. It's the next thing to do. We haven't received the bird numbers, and if we had, they'd need to be put into an assessment for us to go out to consultation and then for us to ratify. So we have no, and as you appreciate, I think it says paragraph 113 of the draft LPP2 113 to 115. We must have an appropriate assessment. The council cannot agree this tomorrow night without an appropriate assessment, and we haven't got one. So that's plain. I think you're a policeman, and you used to be a policeman. You'll be very keen to make sure that the law is followed, I'm sure. So I would appreciate it if you will, ask the officers to confirm for you tonight, firstly, that we cannot submit LPP2 without an appropriate assessment, and secondly, that in view of the fact that the planning practice guidance states, and I quote, competent authorities must assess the robustness of mitigations through an appropriate assessment, the fact that the head of planning has admitted we don't have any assessment of mitigation. We don't have assessment for the mitigation for Hindhead area, and you've got comments from Natural England which amount to an objection on the basis that you need to put together a management plan for the whole of the Weldon Heath Spa, and they're looking forward to doing that. That means, as far as they're concerned, this is not lawful. That's them covering their back. So. You've got Natural England saying we're going to need an appropriate assessment, we're going to need mitigation, and obviously that then needs to be assessed before we can put LPP2 in. So if you can get confirmation that it can't be submitted without an AA, and of course, as the head of planning said, we don't have any evidence of mitigation is effective. We don't have an appropriate assessment. This, of course, is it's the first time that councillors in the 2019 uptake have seen draft LPP2. It wasn't in the papers that went to the Environment ONS a couple of months ago. And there are issues in there which I'm quite sure people would want to cover, certainly in Farnham. We have issues with the strategic gap, the Farnham Aldershot or Farnham Badshot Lee strategic gap, and we also have issues because there is nothing in there to give Farnham protection against the in combination effect of traffic on air quality. That is
30 seconds. 30 seconds on the time.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thanks, Chairman. Yes, the appropriate air quality issue for Farnham is a big one. We need to have protection within LPP2, and there is none in there. That comes from, I think it's about paragraph 200 or so of the NPPF that
I need to bring you to. Thank you for raising that question. Hopefully, Mark has. we'll have a summary of what your question was, and maybe if Mr. Elwood would
I think you need an answer from officers this evening. But thank you very much indeed.
That's what I'm trying to do, Jerry. I think Zach Elwood, who's in the meeting, is going to answer, but we have made a note, or Mark has made a note of your question and concerns. Zach.
Well, firstly, thank you, Councillor Hyman. I don't actually recognise what he's saying about audit committee and the relevance to this committee. It's quite clearly set out in the report that's before you, paragraphs 1.13 to 1.15, that we have undertaken a habitat regulations assessment in terms of Local Plan Part 2, the sister document to Local Plan Part 1, which was also subject to a strategic assessment against the level of growth proposed. It may come as a surprise, but I'm certainly not going to suggest that we can't determine this application. We wouldn't be putting it, this local plan, we wouldn't be putting it forward for your consideration if we didn't feel that it was legally compliant. We're satisfied that the correct assessments have been undertaken, but ultimately this, what we're proposing is that, subject to agreement by Executive and full Council and your comments, that the Local Plan Part 2 document and the addendum are submitted to the Secretary of State. Ultimately, it will be a matter for the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to test whether or not the plan is legally compliant. And part of that test will be looking at the Habitats Regulations Assessment and any work that's been done there. I don't have anything more to say on this subject. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for the response. I'm sure, Mr. Hyman, that you'll have every opportunity tomorrow night to raise your concerns again, if you're not happy with that response. Do we have any other questions, Kim? From okay, so brilliant. Time to open it up for questions from committee members. Councillor Coburn.
I've got masses, so I'll start with one and then everybody else can have a go and I'll come back if I may, Chairman. Just following on a little bit from what Mr. Baudry, was it in the question, and also from the the Natural England response. I have real reservations about the viability of the Royal School site and therefore the safeness, if that's a word, safety of putting it in as an allocation. It's an AONB site and you can describe it in all sorts of ways, but it sits in the AONB. At the time of the merger of the two schools, it was the Royal Naval School on the Farnham Lane site and the Grove School on the Old Grove and the Royal Junior School site, that was the Grove. And at the time of that merger, it was stated that the Grove was the strongest school and that the access along Farnham Lane had contributed to the demise of the Royal Naval School. That was written down by some report and I probably got it somewhere. We are relying on a site which may or may not become available and which may or may not be developable if it becomes available. For a long time now, the school has been trying to consolidate on one side. If you think my interest is current, this is all pre-tunnel, so it's a long time ago. But we had lots of discussion at the time about whether to develop on the Grove site, whether to develop on Farnham Lane, and we couldn't build on the Grove site because we were told we could only build on the footprint of existing buildings. The Grove site was subsequently sold and there are more buildings on that site now than there were when it was a school. The Royal Junior School site, on the other hand, does not have a huge number of buildings. It has Hindhead Court, which used to be the boarding school and the refectory. And then it has the old junior school building from the Grove days, but it has very few other buildings. It is an empty green site. And it's no good saying it's well screened. I've always felt this is like saying it's okay to murder your husband if nobody can see you. You know, if it's wrong, whether I murder him in, you know, broad daylight in front of everybody else or do it behind a hedge. You know, it's wrong, whatever you say. And I'm having real problems with this site. The AONB is there for a reason. And I've said all this before. I've supported the previous iteration and wanted that to go straight to the inspector at the end of the consultation in January. I wanted this plan in place. I thought that plan was sound. I wanted it with the inspector so that we could protect all the other areas of the borough, the Cranleys, the Elsteads, the Farnhams. But we didn't get that. Instead, we've got this delay. I think we're going to get an even further delay. There's no point in putting in a plan. If we want it with the inspector, that isn't an issue. But if the plan is going to be rejected and sent back, we've already seen from, again, Mr. Bawdrey's question, but also for anybody who's read the Haslemere neighbourhood plan, this site is completely at odds with what the Haslemere neighbourhood plan is trying to achieve. It's completely out with the settlement boundary by miles. It's not sustainable. You can't walk anywhere from this site. You will have to drive on this site. It is not on mains drainage and never has been. And those of us who are around for Chasemore on the other side of the old A3 will know that that site was the one that came in pleading to have all the affordable housing removed because of the lack of viability. And that was a much smaller site than this one that they're trying to achieve. I honestly don't think that we can put the quantum of housing on this site that United Learning wants on what they say is the existing hard standing. Hindhead Court is a non-designated listed, non-listed designated heritage asset. You cannot build right up to it and spoil it. And then you're going to cram what? I mean, you might cram a few flats into Hindhead Court, but then you're still going to cram. The only way you'd get 90 is to build all over this site, all over the green. And then you've got to connect those 90 to the sewer and the pumping station in Greyshot. So you've got to do that under the old A3. There's no other way of getting there. I don't think you've ever seen them over the top. So I'm just questioning this site for so many reasons. It's dependent on the school. They're consolidating on the Farnham Lane site. At the moment, there's a limit down to a 106 agreement because of the awful access along Farnham Lane to have a maximum of 200 pupils. They want to double that. In fact, I spoke to the headmistress, lovely lady. I phoned the school and wasn't expecting her to get back to me, but she did. So we had a long chat about the school and what she's intending to do, how she's been put in to turn it round, and United Learning want to maximise value. That's what they do. But there is no guarantee that that school will be able to relocate to Farnham Lane. At the moment, it couldn't do it. Well, it could because the numbers are so low. But if, as they want to do, is get the numbers bigger, they will not be able to locate to Farnham Lane. If they can't locate to Farnham Lane, then the Royal School doesn't even become available. If it does become available, the Natural England has said it needs SANG. And I don't think you can leave all this to the planning stage. We don't have a strategy for delivering SANG in this area. And if you are going to tell me, and I think the mayor told me this, that yes, you can build all those 90 houses and provide SANG. Have you seen the size of a SANG? It's all listed in Natural England's regulations. So I am very worried that this site is not deliverable and that it will fail the test. And then we have gained nothing in time. We've lost all that time from the end of the consultation, the beginning of the year, all the way through. And if it comes back again, we start again. And I would just like some reassurance in the officers, because I can't get it from Natural England. I can't get it from United Learning and the Royal School. I cannot get the certainty I need to support this site going forward. I just don't see it happening. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and you're welcome to come back as many times as you want. I think this is a very different ONS tonight. It's about us going through a very large document and providing our views, scrutinising it, and scrutinise it not as political parties, but we are individuals representing the whole borough. So please feel free to come back as many times. That's the whole point of this meeting tonight. I'm sure Mark got your concerns and wrote those down. Other questions, please? Councillor Foraszewski.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think Councillor Coburn puts forward a very compelling argument, and I, for one, would like to see and support the recommendations so we can move forward. It is a complex document. It isn't clear in any way, shape or form in certain aspects of it. There's so many adjustments and amendments to it that, you know, keeping up is very, very difficult. But I want to really hear what the officers have got to say, because, as I say, my view is we should support it, because I want to see a local plan part 2 adopted. But I can't, I'm compelled to listen to what is a very straightforward, common sense argument. And dare I say, whilst I sit here, that you may remember way back when we were looking at sites being allocated, and the likes of Cranley and Hazelmere, Cranley and Farnham didn't have the protection. You know, we just got bulldozed by concrete. And I remember saying then, be careful what you wish for, because if Hazelmere thinks they're safe, they're not. And this is an example of that coming to fruition. But I would really like to hear from the officer's point of view, because now I find myself having been very strong in support of local plan part 2 being adopted, and maybe letting an inspector come to that final decision, having listened to, as I say, what is a very compelling argument. I really want to hear from the officers as to what their view is on this particular site. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that, Mr. Elwood. Would you like to, I don't want to be going through every single site, but I think this one is probably one that needs to be explored. Can you answer some of those questions, please?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is we can never, as officers, provide any guarantees that the sites we put forward in a local plan will definitely come forward within the plan period. What we need to do is come up with a local plan that we're confident as we can be is deliverable, is robust, and can be found sound when it's examined by an independent inspector allocated by the Secretary of State. In this instance, yes, Hazelmere has been a particularly tricky area to find the right sites to meet the allocation of 990 homes as required under local plan part 1, which is obviously an adopted plan of the council, and there's been a lot of discussions around which sites are appropriate, which sites would deliver the 990 in the best way. We believe that, having looked at the site, we've all been out there. We've met with Natural England, we've met with the school, we've met with Surrey County Council Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty Advisor, and we've discussed at some length. We've challenged the developers on those very points around, is this deliverable within the plan period? You know, particularly around things like the combining of the 2 schools onto the one site at Farnham Lane. And yes, and we're aware of the limitations under the previous planning applications and section 106 or section 52 agreement. And we have pointed the developers, the United Learning, in the direction of Surrey County Council. Discussions are ongoing as we speak, and I understand they're preparing an application to seek to amend that the requirements of the limitations on school pupil numbers at Farnham Lane site with the supporting transport information. Obviously, that's going to be subject very much to the guidance from Surrey County Council, but there certainly hasn't been a flat, no, this is impossible, it's not going to happen, because if that had been the case, then we wouldn't be considering this, we wouldn't have put it forward as officers. Natural England, yes, there is a requirement to provide SANG. I'm going to bring Graham in a minute, because in terms of delivering sites, we do need to provide mitigation in the form of SANG. Not just for this site, but for other sites, and I'll ask Graham to just comment on that in a second. But we have seen a plan from them that actually indicated a compliant SANG within the site. in terms of its length of circular walk, etc. There were some comments from Natural England, and the Developers United Learning have been asked to go back to them to amend that. But certainly we're confident that that shouldn't be a blocker to delivering the site within the plan period. And of course, what we're talking about is only 90 homes in a plan period that runs up to 2032. So we're not talking, I mean, certainly if we were getting closer to the end of the plan period, say we only had like 5 years left, you know, certainly I'm not expecting this to be delivered within the next 5 years. And certainly we haven't included this, for instance, in our recent 5-year land supply statement as a site. What we're looking at as a development to 2032. There are hurdles to be overcome, but we're confident that actually in terms of once those hurdles have been overcome, and we're confident they can be, and that the plan can be found sound, then the actual delivery of those should be possible. There are issues around you know, water connections, sewage, etc., that the developers are aware of, but that's similar to other areas in and around Haslemere. And the bottom line is we have to come up with a plan that we believe is robust, we believe can be found sound, but ultimately it will be an inspector's decision on that. We believe that, you know, this is the best solution we can come up with, given the constraints around Haslemere. And one of the real benefits of delivering the site at Royal School is that it's enabled us, as you'll see in the report, to be a bit less ambitious on some of these sites which we know have been troubling in the past, in terms of sites like such the key site in Haslemere, which has been talked about for 20 odd years, behind Waitrose, the car park, because there's so many different land ownerships there. We did a robust review of that and felt that what we were trying to get on there in terms of the numbers was probably too ambitious and would be difficult to justify. There are hurdles to overcome. I accept that. I'm not saying that this is the, you know, that we have any of the perfect sites, but what we do believe is that the plan we're putting towards you for your consideration tonight can be found sound and is robust, and that's what I wanted to say. But Graham, could you just come in on the SANG mitigation point, if that's okay?
Yes, I think Zach's covered a lot of what I would have said in relation to that. I suppose that a couple of things. Local Plan Part 1, when we set out the strategy and the housing numbers for Haslemere, the position then that the inspector took and that Natural England were taking was obviously that there wasn't a Thames Basin Heath-like solution to the Wilton Heath, and that cases would continue to have to be judged on their merits on a sort of case-by-case basis. And that continues to be the case, although Natural England seem to be firming up their views around certain sorts of thresholds. That isn't set out in an avoidance strategy, and members familiar with Haslemere will know of developments that have gone through in Haslemere where there hasn't been a requirement to provide mitigation in relation to possible impact on the SPA. I would imagine that probably we are heading towards a state in the longer term where there probably will be some kind of avoidance strategy type approach for the Wilton Heath. I don't think it'll be exactly the same as Thames Basin Heath, because I think the issues are slightly different, but we're not there at the moment. And we're in a situation where we have a set allocation where it wasn't deemed that a specific SANG solution was required for Haslemere for those allocations. And some of those sites may well still come forward eventually with no mitigation or with different types of mitigation. What we are looking at here really is firstly, I think in relation to the Royal School, they are still looking very closely at the options of trying to deliver on-site mitigation, and that's still something that is being examined. I think for the slightly longer term, I think we are in discussion with our consultants over in Natural England about what some kind of an avoidance strategy might look like in the future. And I would just remind members that we were in this sort of situation with Local Plan Part 1, when I think the issue was raised at the time about things like the allocation for Farnham and the fact we didn't have enough SANG mitigation at Farnham Park to support the numbers. And what the inspector said there was that wasn't necessarily an issue of a failing in terms of compliance with the legal requirements of the habitats regulations, but it could impact on deliverability. And that's the key thing here. And I think Zach's mentioned it. We're not sort of right at the end of the plan period. We have some time to go within this plan period. we are required as a council to keep our plans under review every 5 years in terms of whether they need to be updated. So we will have to continue to monitor the situation in relation to that. And I'm sure there will be some questions that the inspector will have around the solution and mitigation options that are there. But I think we are confident, and our advisors are confident, I think, that we can put forward an approach through the examination. And clearly, if it transpires in the future that there are problems with any of the sites, whether it's the Royal School or other sites in Hazlemere that can't come forward, and if the SPA becomes part of an issue there, then that's a matter that will need to be picked up as we go through that review process of the plan.
Thank you, Graham. I'm going to open it back to Councillor Coburn. Do you want to come back, and then Councillor Foraszewski if you want to as well?
No, yes, just it's a question that was sort of raised by all of that. I mean, there's no way you will be able to deliver any brownfield sites in Hazlemere without mitigation. So there's, you know, I mean, it doesn't matter which ones they are, every brownfield site will need mitigation. The reason that I'm so confused about these sites in Hazlemere, I'm confused about the timing, but I don't understand, and I keep reading the Hazlemere Neighbourhood Plan and our local plan part 1 and guidance. Honestly, I've done so much homework on this, and I do not understand how the Royal School trumps the Red Court site. I don't get it. They're both outside the settlement boundary, but one is just outside the settlement boundary, abuts development, and if you're fit enough, you could walk into the town centre. The other is miles outside a settlement boundary, which is drawn in the Hazlemere Plan. And the Hazlemere Plan very clearly states they want brownfield first, which is fine. And, you know, if you have brownfield, you need mitigation. And then you go through in the sort of hierarchy, if you like, of designations. And as we know, the Red Court is AGLV, the Royal School is AOMB. I just don't get it. I don't understand at all why one should trump the other. Can I just say, while I'm just talking, I'm a terrific supporter of residents' associations. Work with them. They wrote the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan, the Farnham Design Statement. They've just been reviewing the design statement, and I hope it's coming back from Waverley fairly soon. You know, I couldn't support residents' associations more, but all the residents' associations, every single one, doesn't matter whether they're big, whether they're small, they're rich, whether they're poor, they've all got something to say on these issues. And I really don't understand that how we've ended up with these two sites, if you like, as far as I'm concerned, competing in a way that they needed. It need never to have happened, if you see what I mean, because we had a perfectly good local plan that didn't go forward. I don't buy the timing of all of this. Having spoken to the school, I mean, they're quite open about who approached whom and when and why, because they had already sent a letter out to parents saying something totally different from what they're now saying to the community and to us. So, you know, I'm just so confused as to why we have gone hell for leather for this site over a site which is adjacent to the settlement boundary, which can provide its own sang and has. And I'm sorry, I find this so difficult. Were the Royal School site a brownfield site, you know, within the or close to the settlement boundary, I wouldn't have an issue with it. But it is AONB, all of it, as is the Old Grove site, even though it's got building on. It is AONB. What message are we sending out? I've been sitting in on the Allfold appeal, because you can do it on Zoom. And I've been sitting there gripped for the last 4 days. What message are we sending out? Oh, AOMB, we don't really care about AOMB. Let's shove 90 houses on AOMB. And that's my issue with it. I don't understand. It's not what our local plan says, and it's not what the Hazlemere Neighbourhood Plan says. And I'm just confused of the ball, and I'm sorry.
Thank you for that. And having endured the appeal like you, one of the things that was raised was why are you promoting sites in the ANOB? So actually you're saying build all over places like Allfold. That came out in the appeal, and I accept that's an appellant's right to make that sort of assumption to try, but that was raised. I'll come back to Councillor Forzeski because of the question. I've got Councillor Marriott who's waiting very patiently, and then it'll be followed by Councillor Reid. So, and then if there's a response, then, but people have been waiting patiently, and I think that, you know, given the right. So, is there anything else you want to raise?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Can I just say the first point of observation for me is how close a document of this importance is so close to a full council meeting tomorrow night. I mean, we'll go away from here, as Councillor Coburn has said, and I'm sure we'll experience it. You know, there's a lot of information to take in here. It's not straightforward. It is complicated. And as you leave the chamber, your views may change or whatever. And I just don't feel having tonight is enough time to justify the importance of this document. That's purely an observation. I would like to see, I think we owe it 100% to our residents that if we are going to produce a local plan, part 1, part 2, it must be sound, it must be robust, and it must be what we require going forward. And Zach, I don't want you to apologise for you know, sort of going, we're not quite sure. I want a plan that you're going to go, this is a damn good plan. It's going to meet and deliver. And we're not actually saying that here. We're saying it might, there's mitigation here, then everywhere. And I think when we're looking at the average house price in, you know, in Waverley, it's something like £500,000. I think, you know, we've got to be very careful about what we're doing and what we're saying and where we're putting these buildings. But that's purely an observation at this point in time. Where I am keen, where I'm really desperately keen, is I don't want to get caught up on one site, although I completely understand the relevance of it. But what I do want to see is protection towards the whole of the borough. And if this gives it to us, then I'm minded to swing back into that balance, because we need protection from some of the, we've seen it, there's nothing going to stop people coming forward with applications now or whenever in the future. But we do need something. And my fear is that if we don't get a local plan part 2 under our belt, that might jeopardise it. It worries me also that if that site doesn't come forward that we're talking about, how will that affect the local plan part 2? So there's so many questions. It is terribly confusing. But as I say, I think on a document that is this important to the whole of the borough, to every member, why we've only got 24 hours to digest it is beyond me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me come back, Chairman.
Thank you for that. And that's one of the reasons why I think our recommendations need to be tailored to the position we're in tonight and what we should be recommending. Councillor Marriott next.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm a little confused on the comments about the need for SANGs, mitigation, etc., as a blanket approach to the site as a whole. Is that correct? I mean, do we have an appropriate assessment which covers all of the proposed developments within LPP2? They're not so specific to individual developments. So how does the appropriate assessment sort of apply across all of the sites? And is there a document actually that supports the need for SANG? So obviously you can't use a SANG as a to justify approving a development. The appropriate assessment has to come first. So how does that all sit together? Because I don't see how that works.
Thank you. Maybe we'll store that question until we've done the other questions and then answer in one go rather than ping pong across. So I've got Councillor Reid followed by Councillor Else.
Thank you, Chair. We haven't just had 24 hours. We've had a long time to look at this plan. And we are not, like the previous administration, taking 10 years to produce
Councillor Reid, we're a scrutiny. We're not a political forum.
I would just like
it's not helpful if we can keep to the points.
Order there, if I may. The whole point of us being members and representatives is that we don't just make our mind up and stick with it. So I might hear something here tonight that might make me change my mind for tomorrow. So whilst we've had a long time to think about this, one element tonight could make me change my mind. So yes, I agree, we've had a long time to think about it, but scrutiny is essential. So as when we are making our decisions going forward, we have informed decisions to make based on up-to-date current information. So I don't accept that argument that you've had plenty of time to think about it. We should just stick with that. We are entitled to change our mind as the information, new information, old information, whatever information is available to us, we have that right to actually accept it and digest it the way we see fit. Thank you, Chairman.
Chairman, if I may also make a point of order here. And you have done that, but I'd just like to emphasise that we must have non-partisan scrutiny here, and political elements should not be brought to the argument. Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry if I've offended you all, but there have been political comments during this debate. The Royal School site.
Sorry, I haven't heard one political comment made at all. It's not a matter of offending people. It's a matter about how you deal with scrutiny and best practice for scrutiny. Scrutiny does not say scrutinise on lines of political parties. So I haven't heard one, so if we can be accurate in what we say and respectful in the way that we say it.
We're supposed to be taking part in shaping and improving the delivery of services in the borough. That's one of the things. I'd just like to say that I'm on the board of the AONB, and I was surprised, just as Councillor Coburn was, to hear that this site, the Royal School, had come forward. But it's been scrutinised by the AONB advisor, and I understand from reading the documents that this is considered, as is the Grove area, a brownfield site. And that is why it has been approved, I understand. I'm open to be corrected. Now, mitigation, we've heard about the fact that maybe it's a long way for people to walk. Now, when I lived in the Guildford borough, we had the flats at the top of the high street, market homes. They couldn't provide a site for mitigation or a site for affordable homes, so they had to be put up on the Epsom Road. So I'm sure in these situations, that Royal School, for instance, if it does come eventually, can be dealt with in a similar way. So I'll reiterate that these sites, these two sites, are deemed to be brownfield sites. And that's why the AONB inspector has approved them being submitted. And that's what I understand, but I'm very happy for one of the officers to tell me if I'm wrong. Thank you.
Okay, I think you've asked a question which I think you said if anybody wants to clarify. Councillor Coburn, is there something that might help with the debate on that last point?
Well, no, I'm quite happy to leave it to the officers, but they are not brownfield sites by any definition. They may be partly previously developed in the case of the junior school site. There's more building on it was sold to Elifar and they built or put up buildings. But when the school came in 2012 for some more development on the junior site, Clive Smith at that point said that the building should be knocked down as soon as the educational use had finished. So, I mean, he actually did not want permanent buildings added to the AONB in 2012. So, you know, I'm all over the place, if you like, with advice, but previously developed. Partly previously developed. Have a look on the map. You can see where it is. You've got Hindhead Court, you've got a couple of other admin buildings, and the rest is all, there's some woodland, there's a pond. I always remember we had somebody called Dr. Trout in charge of the pond, which always amused me. We've got pond, we've got woodland, we've got playing pitches, and we've got wild green space. You know, it is not brownfield by any definition, and it's certainly not on our brownfield register.
Thank you. Councillor Else, you've been very patient.
Oh, I haven't really, have I? And no, this is another point of order really that I didn't want to interrupt. I may have misheard because I do have a problem with hearing, but has an interest been declared by Councillor Reid if she's on the AOMB board? Should that have happened? Seems to me that there must be a conflict of interest there somewhere.
Mark, do you want to have a comment?
I'm going a bit beyond my expertise. Sorry. I'm going a bit beyond my expertise, but I would suggest unless that's a remunerated position, it probably doesn't constitute a conflict of interest that has to be declared, though a councillor might well still wish to declare it as a personal interest.
Yeah, bear in mind parish councillors who don't get paid do declare an interest on certain things. I think it's probably best if you declare an interest, at least it's recorded. If you wish to do that, I can't do that on your behalf.
May I say something now? Yes, I am on the board, but I was referring to the advisor who is independent, if you know what I mean. He's always consulted.
I hear your point. Personally, if it was me, I would declare it because obviously the ANOB board could play a part in any planning application at some stage. If it was me, I probably would declare it.
Well, I'll declare that. Thank you very much, Chair.
Councillor, any other points any other points you want to raise or?
Yes, I did. I wanted to say that in regard to agenda item 3, which we've been presented with this evening, it's not a technical point I want to make, but I want to ask, may we presume that this does not now, the removal of Red Court and the inclusion of the school does not now have the support of Hazelmere Town Council? Because it seems to me that if it's included in these papers, as supporting it, they quite clearly say here that if there's any building on, unless we're going to accept that the whole site is brownfield, which I think I've heard Mr. Elwood say this evening. But I mean, is that actual fact? I mean, we seem to, Hazelmere Town Council are happy for it to be built on as long as it's not built on anywhere else that hasn't been previously built on. That is their qualification of their support. So if that appears therefore that they're not supporting it, these papers just need to be changed. There needs to be an addendum to the papers so that all councillors understand that, not just us.
Thank you for that. Now, hopefully, Zach, you've managed to take all those various points in to try and summarise the views, all the questions that have been put.
Well, just on the final point, thank you, Councillor Els. On page 263 of your agenda, sorry if you have to jump around, we have summarised the Hazelmere Town Council's response where they talk about inclusion of DS06 Royal Junior School site. They say, subject to a development cap of 90 units and built on land which there were previously constructed buildings or hard standing. So I think their position is not in dispute, and it's in the documents that you're considering tonight. So I'm not sure what more I can say on that.
Well, you have said that the whole site is considered a brownfield site, and that you wouldn't get 90 houses on the area where there were buildings.
So I think to be fair, that was in the response from Councillor Andy McLeod that was produced there. But what I would say is, I don't like this use of the word brownfield. What I would say is this is a previously developed land, and according to the so I mean, just for your benefit, I've just brought up the definition of previously developed land, if I may, from the National Planning Policy Framework, July 2021. So that's previously developed land is land which is or was occupied by a permanent structure, including the curtilage of the development land, and that's crucial. Brackets, although it should not be assumed that the whole of the curtilage should be developed, so that's a further consideration. And any associated fixed surface infrastructure. This excludes land that is or was occupied by agriculture or forestry, buildings, land agricultural forestry buildings, land that has been developed for minerals extraction or waste disposal or by landfill, where provision for restoration has been made through development management procedures, land in built-up areas such as residential gardens, parks, recreation grounds and allotments, and land that was previously developed land, but where the remains of the permanent structure or fixed surface structure have blended into the landscape. I think the point we're making is we believe this meets the definition of previously developed land. The sites at Royal School, appreciate others may disagree. This is the officer's position, and that is one of the reasons in explanation to Councillor Coburn, who cannot understand, although we have had correspondence about this, Councillor Coburn, where I have set this out in a couple of occasions that's our position. We believe this is previously developed land, as opposed to the site at Redcourt, which is Greenfield site. It hasn't had any buildings on it. It is not previously developed land. That's the main difference. But I would come back to the other point, and Councillor Reid did make this point, that from an AOMB point of view, yes, I would say that if you took the sites purely on whether it's AOMB or not AOMB, the site at Redcourt scores more highly because it's AGLV, which is not a statutory allocation of the same weight as Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. The Redcourt site is a candidate area, but we've made it clear that we can't give weight to the fact that it's a candidate area for future AOMB. So at the moment, as it stands, that's AGLV. So that site scores more highly in AOMB grounds. But I think the crucial thing here, which Councillor Reid did point out, and I was going to make the point, is this is not something we've just conjured out of thin air and not sought to discuss with the AOMB advisor at Surrey County Council. We were very open. We took them out on a site visit, and their view is that this site is preferable to the site at Redcourt in AOMB AGLV landscape terms. So that's just a matter of their opinion there and fact. But at the end of the day, it will be a matter for executive and then full council to decide whether or not they believe the plan is robust and should be submitted for examination. So those are the points. Coming back to Councillor Forojewski's point, I mean, I tend to agree, and I apologise on behalf of the planning service that the amount of time you've been given between now and it going to executive and full council is not very long. We're between a bit of a rock and a hard place in terms of wanting to push forward the local plan part 2 as quickly as possible to ensure that it gets submitted to Secretary of State and has the best possible chance of getting to an early examination and hopefully early adoption. And we were concerned that because we've gone through this further round of consultation, which was necessary given the change in site allocations, that we were concerned that delaying it to beyond Christmas and into the new year would put us in a difficult position in terms of wanting to push forward with the local plan. And obviously I'm sure at the appeal that's been heard this week and the appeal on Redcourt, which starts on Thursday, the point will be made by certain developers that you don't have the local plan part 2, which was, and local plan part 1 was adopted in 2018. And so whilst the key thing is our 5-year land supply, and obviously we produced our position statement recently, the narrative of having that local plan adopted is helpful to our future discussions and protecting those very areas that we're concerned about, outside of Farnham, outside of Hazelmere, and around the Cranley, Dunsfold, Alfold area where we don't have the green belt protection. And so, yes, I understand your frustration and concern about that. I really do. But as I say, we felt we wanted to come back to an ONS for further comments, but time was against us in terms of trying to get a local plan through, and I suppose this was seen as the lesser of two evils, but I think it's a very valid point. And then, sorry, finally through you, Chairman, would it be okay in terms of Councillor Marriott's questions about the habitats regulation assessment of the sites? Would it be possible to bring in my colleague Matthew Ellis, who's the local plans manager?
Certainly, and then I've got a couple of questions, and then I think Councillor Coburn will come back. So thank you.
Yeah, just very simply, habitat regulation assessment was actually undertaken both for the pre-submission version of the plan that we consulted on last year. That was published at the same time, and that obviously looked at all the sites that were in that plan. And then when we amended the plan and the addendum was published, prior to that, we took habitats regulations assessment for the new sites were in that. So we do have a habitats regulation assessment that covers all the sites.
Thank you. Councillor Marriott, does that answer your question?
Thank
You're on mute.
Sorry, yeah. Yes, thank you. I was looking to see that there was an appropriate assessment done for each individual site, because the impression I got was the need for a SANG seemed to be distanced from that, not part of the appropriate assessment. But I think that's answered the question. Thank you.
Thank you. So before I go to Councillor Coburn, there's just a couple of points. I mean, firstly, the comments about the timescales for scrutiny. It's not good practice to do it the night before full council, because there could be a number of questions, there could be a number of issues you want to raise that you actually can't resolve. So I think we will record that we're disappointed in the timescales. I do understand what you've said, and trying to get a plan before Christmas, but it's not a good aid to scrutiny. My one question about the conversations that I've just been listening to, and if I've missed this, my apologies. What is the percentage of the previously developed site as a percentage of the whole site? So are we talking 80% is previously developed and it's only 20%, or are we talking only 20%? Do we know that? Because I think for me, trying to understand that, the issues, that's really, really important, because if only 20% is previously developed and 80% is greenfield, it gives it a totally different slant. Now, you might not be able to, because but I would think that point should come up tomorrow. I would like to know before tomorrow if I can. I'm not going to try and expect you to try and work it out now.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I'll answer your question slightly differently. As set out in the MPPF, we believe the site as a whole is previously developed land, because it doesn't just talk about those areas that are built on it, talks about its curtilage as well. But I think what you're asking for is the percentage of that land which actually currently has buildings or hard standing areas. So we can certainly provide that information for in time for executive tomorrow, unless Graham has that to hand. No, I'm not getting it.
No, and because I have heard Waverley put that argument up on appeals of how much is actually being developed and how much is still countryside beyond the green belt. So we can't have it both ways, which is why I'd like to have that figure for tomorrow night, please. Councillor Coburn, I think you wanted to come back, and then Councillor Else.
It's the consistency element. Zach, you are patience personified. I mean, I have no problem with the officers trying to explain this to me. I just don't get it. It's obviously the fault is in my brain. You say that Red Court has no, curtilage. Well, of course, there's curtilage. It was the Garden of Red Court. It must be previously developed land in as much as this land. And if we all look at page 218 and 219 in our papers, I mean, you can see the map of Hazelmere and where this sits. You can also see what the site looks like. And you've got development up in the north bit near that new roundabout, which obviously wasn't there any time when I used to go on the site, and the old Grove site, which is, as I say, much more built up than it was when it was just the senior school. Now, you've got all the boundaries sort of clearly marked, and the boundary of the Waverley boundary clearly marked. So you are looking at putting, as far as I can see, 2/3 of the development for Hazelmere miles away from any settlement. You've got your little pockets in Hazelmere itself, which are going to add a few to it. But when you actually come down and look at the allocations down the old A3 or near the new A3, where on earth are these people going to go to shop? I mean, we talk about sustainability, and the whole point about our sustainability policies is that they are supposed to encourage development in areas where you don't need to use the car because you're close to other services, you're close to buses, or you can cycle or you can walk. Now, there's absolutely no way. We used to have to drive down Nutcombe Lane to get across the 287 and then up Farnham Lane. And believe you me, that could take hours. Nutcombe Lane, and Nutcombe is a hamlet. I mean, you can't even call it a village. So all these people will be going into Greyshot. I presume you've spoken to Greyshot, and we got a duty to cooperate with East Hants and the Greyshot Parish Council, because all of these people will get in their cars and go to Greyshot. That's the obvious place to go and do your shopping. You've got a bit of countryside here which is blanked out because, of course, that's Hampshire, not Surrey, or East Hants, not Waverley. So, my question is, if you look carefully at that site, you can see very clearly where the built form is. And that, as I say, was Hindhead Court. It was an old country house. It's not listed, but it is of historic interest. Near Amesbury School, which is closer to the Old Grove site, you've got another listed. I think it's actually a listed asset there. You've got some lovely old houses there, and they sit within wooded areas because that's what the AONB was. On the site, you've got some pitches, playing pitches, no idea how many, but you've certainly got playing pitches. And somewhere I read that you'll be able to relocate those to Farnham Lane. Well, I don't know where. Those of you who've been up to Farnham, it's not a lot of flat space. I mean, you can have a pitch. I remember playing on an old lacrosse pitch, which was halfway down a hill, but I don't think you could play much else. So, Sport England have raised an objection to this on the grounds of the loss of playing fields. And where are you going to put them again? They have said they have to be either retained or replaced and enhanced. Where are we going to do that? So I just find this so problematic that the decision has been taken to put everything in Nutcombe, basically, on this little hamlet with no walking, no buses, absolutely nothing. And I don't accept that all of that is the curtilage of the school. If you don't accept that the whole of the garden of Red Court is also its curtilage.
I'll let Zach come back and then we'll move on to other topics.
Thank you, Chairman. It was really, I mean, I'm not going to obviously get into a long debate because I know time is precious and stuff, people don't speak. I just want a point of clarification. So Red Court is a residential property, and the definition I read out to you from the NPPF clearly, just to repeat, clearly says that residential gardens are not classed as previously developed lands. So the school is a different animal, different beast to the Red Court site. That's the only point I'm going to make. So it can't be classed as previously developed land. The gardens are Red Court. Thank you.
Okay. I think I had Councillor Reid first, then Councillor Else.
Thank you, Chair. I think if people want a very good understanding, if you look at page 248 and 249, towards the end of the document, 3.16, 3.17 and 3.19. I found those very helpful.
Thank you for pointing them out. So Councillor Else, and I believe Councillor Baker's after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry to go on about this. It's a non-technical matter, but it's a matter of principle. I'm very concerned about Hazelmere Town Council. It quite clearly says in this agenda item 3 what their position is, and I'm hoping that somebody's going to contact somebody tomorrow, the chairman or the mayor or whoever it is, and make sure that these papers are correct, because it's very clear to me that if they really only give their support if it's on land which has previously been built on. Nothing to do with brownfield site. If it said brownfield, that would be one matter, but it doesn't say brownfield. It says land that has been previously built on. Now, I would like to check with them as a matter of principle and honour, actually, that they are still happy with these papers, which say they give their support to the school proposal. And if they do, fine, I'm happy with that, but I want to make sure, and I know we only have one day to do that, but that's not their fault. So I'd like some assurance that they're going to be contacted and it's going to be established that they're still happy to give their support. Thank you.
Thank you for that point. I'm sure Mark's made a note and will make sure, and Zach, that very point is dealt with promptly tomorrow morning to make sure that information comes to light. But I think your point's is well made, that we need to be accurate in what we say, and a confirmation either way would be good. But Mark will make that note, and at the end we'll make sure that we're happy with the summary. So we have Councillor Baker and then Councillor Foraszewski.
Thank you, Chairman. If you grant me some indulgence while I remove the mask. I would like to say that I have never before heard the information that is set out in papers being questioned as to its veracity and accuracy. I think it's entirely unnecessary to do what Councillor Else has just suggested, and I am strongly opposed to it. It's just, it beggars belief. I have never heard that checked, that request for a check on information before. And I'm going to suggest that that request to Officer Mills is withdrawn. It's entirely unnecessary.
Okay, but the role of scrutiny is to scrutinise, to question, to probe, and to ask questions.
Well, if I'm going to ask you a question, Chair, in that case, have you ever come across a case where a scrutiny committee has asked for information set out in the papers to be checked?
As the chair, I have asked and called in an item that had information that we weren't sure about, information that we felt was missing, and information we felt hadn't gone through the correct process. And that matter was called in to a special ONS to actually go through that. So that is the role of scrutiny. Otherwise, why do we scrutinise? We might as well just rubber stamp everything. You know, so I think it's an appropriate request, and I think it falls absolutely in line with scrutiny principles.
Well, I really have to take issue with you on that. You are therefore saying that we can't rely on any of the information in these papers. Is that what you're saying?
I think there's only a couple of particular points that have been raised, and it is right, if they've been raised, that we look to make sure they're accurate, because we have to vote on them when we go to council. And I certainly wouldn't want to vote on something if it hasn't had a correct level of scrutiny. It hasn't gone through every single point. There's 250 pages of the document, and we've discussed taking away the presentation, probably 1 hour on a number of points. This is exactly what scrutiny is about. It is to make sure the council is doing things correctly. It has done the right processes. It has gone through everything it needs to do, and the information is correct. And I think any scrutiny committee that doesn't do that, frankly, fails to do the role of scrutiny. So I'm satisfied that is a correct question. And I'm sure the officers actually want members to actually ask those sort of questions to probe them to make sure it's correct and it's the right train of thought. Zach, if you want to.
Well, the only question I have, which I'm confused about, and obviously, you know, stand to be corrected, is that we're considering agenda item 5, and the papers that are put towards you to the ONS in agenda item 5. And as I pointed out on page 263, the summarised response from Hazelmere Town Council is that they support removal of Red Course site and support inclusion of DS06 Royal Junior School site, subject to a development cap of 90 units and built on land where there were previously constructed buildings or hardstanding. I don't see that's equivocal in any way. It's very clear what their position is, and we've reported that clearly. I believe what Councillor Else is referring to is agenda item 3, which is a question from the member of the public, and the response that Councillor MacLeod gave included the sentence that Waverley is aware that the Town Council has commented on the addendum to LPP2. They feel the dwellings proposed in the housing allocation for the Royal Junior School should be accommodated within an existing built-up area of the site. That's entirely consistent with what is said on page 263. And also that Hazelmere Vision have stated the numbers seem high. However, both the council and Hazelmere Vision are clear in their general support for the allocation of the site for housing. Now, I think that's where the question has come, but the summary in the report quite clearly says Hazelmere Town Council support inclusion of Royal Junior School site subject to these criteria. So I think I'm not sure what, I'm very happy to go back to them, just check that what we're saying in the question is correct, but I don't think there's any debate whatsoever that what we've stated in the report on page 263 accurately reflects the response that we've received from them. And obviously, if members want, we can find the actual full response from Hazelmere Town Council and provide that. But that was my only question, but very happy to do it, Chairman. You know, I've got no problem with going to them tomorrow morning and just saying, just to check that you're happy with the response that was given under the question. If they say, oh no, that's not quite right, then we'll correct that for executive and full council.
Thank you. I think Councillor Coburn, I can see her pens in the air.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's just on this question of density, because if you put the 90 dwellings that's proposed on the previously developed land as exists, as the Hazelmere Vision and Hazelmere Town Council seem to want, you are building on that land at a huge density. I mean, I know across the green bit you're not, but you know, the Hazelmere is very keen on density, the neighbourhood plan. You know, it has a higher density in the town centre. It's what it goes on and it goes out. And so you would be looking at low density on this one. And if you're going to tell me that, you know, 90 is low density because all of the green stuff is not going to be built on, I can't understand how you're going to get the 90 in any suitable way on that. And I think this is where Hazelmere Vision's beginning to question now. You know, they've made the point, it's got to be on the hard standing. You've got your non-designated heritage assets. You've got to be careful what you do with Hindhead Court. Yes, you can convert it to flats, but it's got to be done, you know, in a good way. So you can't have another block of flats right up to it because you won't be protecting its setting. So what I'm saying is, you know, I'm confused because the plan that was submitted, I don't know where I saw it, had buildings everywhere. I mean, all over the site, right, completely out there, and it had bands going around it, and they were going to be, you know, 4 bedrooms, they were going to be whatever, and it filled the entire site. Now, that is not, if I'm reading it correctly, what either the Hazelmere Town Council wants or Hazelmere Vision.
Okay,
and I can see that confusion. Zach, if you want to respond, and then I've got another speaker.
Sorry. Well, just to make it clear that, you know, we're presenting what Hazelmere Town Council have said, and that's important. But that's just a consultation response in the same way as any other consultation response from Mrs. Miggins at number 33 or whatever. It's a consultation response. Sorry, I'm not saying that the parish council's responses, the town council's responses are not important. What I'm saying is that's their view. That's not what we're saying. And apologies if it's got confused. They're saying that they would like the 90 dwellings to be limited to only those areas which are hard surfaced or have existing buildings on them. We're not saying that for one moment. And I go back to Councillor MacLeod's response earlier to the question under agenda item 3. It states quite clearly in the response, it is recognised that it will not be possible to design an acceptable scheme for this number of units, i.e. 90, that is solely contained within the footprint of the existing buildings and hard surfaced areas. However, the council is confident that the character of the site, its size and degree of natural screening are such that a well-designed scheme for the quantum of development as proposed in the addendum to LPP2 can be accommodated without having an adverse impact on the countryside and AONB. And just for clarification, the meeting we had with United Learning that the AONB advisor at Surrey County Council attended, the scheme that was put forward then wasn't limited to the hard surfaced areas and the existing buildings. And I don't think for one moment you could get 90 homes on there that would, well, you could get 90 homes on there, but there'd be big ugly blocks. Whereas what we're talking about is a more low density scheme across the whole of the site, albeit converting the existing school buildings, as Councillor Coburn rightly said, they'll almost certainly be converted to apartments. And we have encouraged the developer to utilise that building as efficiently as they can when they come in with an application to obviously reduce the overall impact. So just to be clear, we're not suggesting for one moment that what we're proposing is what Hazelmere Town Council have necessarily stated is their position. What we're saying is they have general support subject to those criteria. It may be that that's not possible to meet those criteria.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I think that's enlightening. I think the request has been made that you check, and I think as there has been so much debate not to, we just leave things up in the air, and I think it's about clarity. So if you can make that check, and whichever way, whatever the answer is, at least we have an absolute confirmation then. So we're grateful for doing that. I think that's the easiest way. I think the only other hand I've got up is Councillor Foraszewski. Thank you for waiting.
No, you're very welcome, Chairman, and I will try to be brief if I can. I think we got a bit stuck here. Local Plan Part 2 is about a whole load of different sites, not just this one in Hazelmere. And what I would say about Hazelmere, I've got to be very careful because I love Hazelmere. I lived there for a number of years. But if Hazelmere and many other places in Waverley had sat back and taken notice and didn't get complacent and watch what was happening to Cranley and Farnham all those years ago when we just got bulldozed and the village is completely changed out of all recognition, they probably would have had the vision then to think about how they could work together to protect Hazelmere better. So I'm sorry, you've got to be careful what you wish for here. As I say, I found this extremely useful. I really have, because I came in with one viewpoint, I listened to other viewpoints, and now I've got the point that what I've come back to now is talking about what I've just said there about you know, what happened all those years ago. I'm even more confident now tonight that we need a local plan Part 2. I take on board all the issues that have been raised tonight, but we need that plan in order to move forward and to protect the villages and the towns in Waverley, because without it, we're not going to get, and I think I take on board exactly what's been said, but there's an inspector going to make a ruling on this, and he, whichever way he rules, they'll get clarity on it. But I think, I know I wanted to say to Zach when you were talking there, you know, I want it too. We've wanted it, and many of us have wanted it for a long time. We haven't wanted opportunistic developers in the background hovering over, just looking for a little bit of land that they can build on. I also just want to address the point about scrutiny. Scrutiny is essential to democracy, and anybody at any point has got any right to say something, equally as Councillor Elson, equally as Councillor Baker. Without scrutiny, we don't have transparency. And what I would say is it gives officers an opportunity to showcase what you do. If we don't question you, you can't come back to us. And when you come back to us and explain, then we can go, thumbs up, we know. So it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. And without it, there's no transparency. So having listened to the debate, I am going to wholeheartedly put my vote behind the recommendations, because it is not just about Hazelmere, it's about many, many other sites, many other aspects of the local plan Part 2. I think we need to get on and get this pushed forward as quickly as possible, so as we're not vulnerable. Thank you, Chairman, for letting me come back.
Fine. Now we've got about 32 minutes before this meeting concludes, and I want to talk about equestrian policies, or lack of, and lack of things for rural settlements. So I'm very conscious of that. Councillor Reid, if I'll let you speak next, and then we'll move on to other aspects of this document.
I would like some clarification because I know nothing was done in local plan part 1 or much in the way of sites for our traveller friends, and I thought it was very meagre what is in this plan. So I'd like some clarification from an officer, please, on that.
I'm sure there'll be others who can tell more, give a better explanation, but it's done on where they've done an assessment of future needs. And if I'm correct, that it actually covers not only future needs, but it's also future proofed as well. So it's not just plucking out a figure, it's looking at what is the need going to be over that plan period. So that's how they've got to that figure. But if I'm right, I think it was increased slightly just to future-proof it as well. Zach, if you want
to. Yes, well, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, effectively, we take an objectively assessed need for gypsy and traveller pictures based on, as I said, objective assessment, and then we allocate sites accordingly. We've allocated sites to fully meet our need and projected need for the plan period, unless Graham or Matthew correct me and say that I'm wrong.
No, that's absolutely correct. I mean, the travel accommodation assessment was taken as part of local plan part 1, but taking into account the number of permissions that have been granted since, that slightly changed the number that we're actually allocating in the plan, although you won't see it in the addendum, of course, because that wasn't actually put forward as one of the changes as a main modification. So the actual allocations for pictures are found in the plan that we consulted on last year. And as Zach said, yes, and Councillor Dinas has also said, we're obviously taking into account the need that is actually known need that meets the government definition, but also some contingency to meet the unknown need where we haven't been able to interview households to establish what their needs are and they meet that definition.
Thank you both.
I've impressed myself with my knowledge. That's all I'm saying. No, thank you. So I wanted to raise the issue about the equestrian policy for rural communities, and how can I put this politely, that some people go for certain permissions and all of a sudden after a year or so it gets converted into houses. So I think there's a real concern that we haven't looked at probably the rural communities as closely as we should, bearing in mind how much of Waverley is rural communities and rural areas. So that's my gripe. It's not necessarily a showstopper, but I would like at some stage, once we get through this process, we can look at how can we close some of those issues.
Yes, certainly won't labour the point, but as mentioned earlier, Graham mentioned earlier, we do have to decide whether or not to review our local plan within 5 years of adoption. Obviously, that was February 2018. So we've literally got a year and 2 months to make that decision. And obviously, I think without prejudicing what the council might do, I think there's been lots of changes, and I think there is likely to be a desire to start to review the local plan at that stage, and there'll be an opportunity, obviously, to start looking at more strategic policies on the basis that local plan part 2 has to have a certain level of compliance with part 1 in terms of what it covers and what it doesn't cover. So yeah, so it's a very valid point there, Councillor Dinas, and one that's not lost on me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Graham, I'm sure you've made a note of that, because I won't forget. A year's not long. It's logged up there to come back. Okay, so I've given my big issue about a missing policy. I think we've had a pretty robust discussion about Hazelmere. I'm opening up now. We have 27 minutes for other issues you would like to raise in relation to LPP2. I was wondering why you hadn't come up, Martin, and I can probably guess what some of your views are going to be, but you're very welcome.
Well, actually, I don't know if you'll guess. On page 138 is the development plan, or DM 33, Downs link to Guildford Downslink Guildford to Cranley corridor. Now, I'm curious about this because I happened to be in a planning meeting where we actually gave permission for it to be turned into a canal. So that would seem to me to be, we're creating a policy which we've already broken, which is a curious thing.
I suppose the policy isn't broken because the policy isn't a policy until it's gone through the inspector and it's approved. So it's broken an aspirational policy, but it hasn't broken a policy. Would be my answer.
Yeah, fair point. I suppose it was more of a question to the officers as to what the effect of that would be, because it seems a bit of a curious thing to put it to the inspector in that state.
Zach, would you like to answer?
Yeah, I mean, I do know the application in question, and actually, just to clarify, there was a resolution to grant permission. There has since been, without going into details, since been a pre-application protocol letter that we've received, and we have decided that for belt and braces, we will be bringing that application back to a planning committee in the new year. So just to reassure that there's actually no formal decisions being made in respect to the application, because the decision is only made when the decision notice goes out the door. But that's a matter for another discussion. But I do know that actually part of that proposal was to reroute part of the Downs link. And so it wasn't closing off the sustainable transport corridor in its totality, but the point is made, and I think your point was the right one, that, you know, at the moment that policy carries very, very limited weight, because it hasn't, although it's gone through consultation, hasn't even been submitted to the Secretary of State as yet, and is something that may be the subject of discussion at an examination in public. But I just wanted to clarify. Sorry if that was too much information.
Councillor Darcy, do you want to come back on that?
No, that's fine. I mean, I probably would have raised the issue of biodiversity. That's possibly you're thinking of, but given the changes that the Environment Act is introducing, I feel that probably most of that is going to be covered in future. So, thanks.
Thank you. One to look forward to in the new year then. So, thank you for that, Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I will reiterate what Councillor Darcy said. I think we were on the same page with that when that planning application came in. And I was under the impression that this was a transport corridor, but the policy was made by the county, not by us.
Can you add to that debate, Zach, or not?
I don't think I have anything to add. I mean, this is our policy in our emerging local plan that officers are putting forward for consideration. Obviously, it's being consulted on with the county council, but yeah, I don't have anything to add, sorry.
No, I'm not sure we can add too much to that debate. I think the point is being raised. Any other questions? Any questions that we've got online or we haven't? So can I suggest we ask Mark to give us a summary of the points? It's not saying that everybody agrees with every point, but the points that have been raised, and then I'll discuss what we think is an appropriate worded recommendation. So Mark?
Yeah, so I think I'd got 5 recommendations, but the 5th one is much longer than the others. And it should also be said, I think I'm considerably less familiar with these sites than most people here. So if you think I have misunderstood something, I probably have, and please don't have an embarrassment about pointing that out. So the recommendations: 1, that in future a longer time be allowed between ONS meetings and executive and full council. 2, officers will provide an estimate of what percentage of the Royal School site is currently covered by buildings and curtilage in time for hard standing. Okay. Yeah, hard standing in time for the executive on 14th of December 2021, confirm in time for the executive on the 14th of December 2021, if in light of Mr. Bowdry's question, whether Hazelmere Town Council are content with the characterisation of their views in the report. At a later date, consider whether the existing equestrian policy provides sufficient protection against, okay, whether the lack of a, okay, consider potentially developing an equestrian.
Mark, so it was to ensure that rural communities are protected, as a large percentage of Waverley is rural.
Communities are protected, and was that something about houses being, things being converted into houses that shouldn't be?
Yeah, it's just to ensure that we're as tight as we can. I think we've got to be careful we don't write that as a summary, but it's to ensure that there are adequate equestrian and sort of agricultural rural policies to protect unique sort of nature of Waverley's rural settlements, something along those lines.
Protect the unique quality of Waverley's rural settlements. Sorry, I wish I was a faster typer. And then 5, and this is the long one, that the executive and council have due regard to the following questions when debating the recommendations in section 2 of the report. A, whether an appropriate assessment is required in order to comply with the habitats regulations. B, whether the likelihood that the future development at the Royal School would exceed the existing footprint, would exceed the footprint of the existing buildings and hard surfaces at the site, would threaten the setting of the neighbouring countryside. C, whether the Red Court site being nearer the settlement boundary and being more walkable from Hazelmere makes it a more appropriate site than the Royal School. Do these factors impinge on Waverley's commitment to sustainability? Whether the executive and full council, point D, whether the executive and full council can have confidence the Royal School, open brackets, including its playing fields, will be able to relocate to the Farnham Road and make the site available within the plan period. With point E, whether either, both, or neither the Royal Court and Red Court sites should be, yes, thank you, whether the Royal School and Red Court site should be treated as brownfield and or previously developed. Point F, whether the requirement to provide a SANG to mitigate developments at the Royal School adversely impacts the deliverability of that site.
So just clarify, SANG to mitigate
mitigate the impact of development at the Royal School. Point G, whether screening is an adequate response to the potential loss of green space on the Royal School site. H, whether allocating the Royal School sets an unwelcome precedent about building in AONBs, and whether a given course of action will delay adoption of LPP2 as a whole and therefore reduce the council's control over development within the borough. And I think it sounded from the discussion like you didn't want to make points about the sites for travellers or the Guildford, the canal, but you could add something in if that was the view you did want to take.
I'm glad that you know your ABCs. You can teach my grandson. I thought that was. So I personally, my view is I don't think we need to mention the Travers allocation, because I think that's well evidenced in how we've got to it, and the canal is going to be a planning issue, which we'll have the joy of looking at in January. Can I just ask everyone? So Mark's done, I think, a really good job trying to record all those. Are there any that we raised and haven't been recorded? So I've got two hands. Councillor Coburn, you were first.
Yes, I just asked whether we had a duty to cooperate with East Hants and the Greyshot Parish Council. I can't see any cooperation with him because, you know, basically the impact of the Royal School is going to be felt in Greyshot. And I would have thought we had a duty to cooperate with
sorry, was that East Hants and Greyshot? Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for raising that. Councillor Ross, do you have a...
Yes, Councillor Coburn did raise the question of the drainage on the school site, which I think is quite an important one to reconsider or look at carefully.
Okay, so we can put there were serious concerns about the sewage, and I think it raises the point. And finally, you've got another.
Well, the point about the sewage, it raises the question of the viability of that site. And this is the issue, which also then has an impact on affordable housing. And this is what's happened elsewhere in that area. So, you know, putting 130 there, you know, you've got to do something about the sewage. You're not allowed just to have 130 septic tanks, you know, you've got to do something about it. And that really will have an impact on the viability of that site. And certainly the United Learning said to me that, you know, it's got to be over 50. I mean, you know, so that's where we get to the 90. But at what point do they start saying that, you know, it's too expensive to do the sewage, we'll take out the affordable? And that's always an issue with that sort of site.
If it's a quick response, what I don't want to do is get into a debate.
No, it's not debate. It's actually going to agree with Councillor Coburn. I was just going to put, I don't want to put words in the mouth, but I think from that, you're questioning deliverability of the site within the plan period as a potential impact of viability. I think I just want to make that clear that that's what was.
Yep, no, that's useful. Councillor Marriott, you have your hand up. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, just a point for clarification. Is it item I, Mark, you had about the problem if you needed a SANG in terms of the deliverability? Was it?
It's now H because an additional thing's been added in.
I think it might be good to say, following the appropriate assessment undertaken by Natural England, they have concluded, and then the rest of your sentence follows.
So the existing sentence is whether the requirement to provide a SANG to mitigate the impact of development at the Royal School adversely impacts the deliverability of that site. Where?
Yes, but I think wasn't it said that Natural England have actually said it does need a SANG?
Something like whether the requirements to provide a SANG as requested by Natural England or something?
No, because it has to come from an appropriate assessment. Like I said, just for clarity, I think we need to make sure that, or at least to say that the appropriate assessment undertaken by Natural England indicated that a SANG is necessary, and then that goes on to your sentence to add the words that might affect the future deliverability.
I think we might have a bit of clarity from the officers. So.
Yeah, the appropriate assessment isn't undertaken by Natural England. Obviously, they look at it in terms of their role as having responsibility for biodiversity. The actual appropriate assessment undertaken by consultants, AECOM in the case of the two that I was discussing. So, you know, the question is the right one. It's just that it's not undertaken by Natural England themselves. Natural England themselves have advised that SANG is required for sites that are of 50 dwellings and more, which affect his SPA phase 2.
Okay, but that has to be based on an appropriate assessment. up front, not after the event.
Yes, and it's the appropriate assessment, as I said, has already been taking place prior to the actual publication of the plans for consultation.
Absolutely. All I'm saying is that perhaps it makes it clear if that a statement like that is actually put into that item to say that hasn't been undertaken, and that leads to the conclusion that a SAN is required.
So with that, sorry, Chair, would that maybe be something like whether the requirements identified by, I forgot the name of the consultant, Acorn, to provide a SAN ...
Yeah, something like that. Yes, following their assessment, appropriate assessment undertaken by that consultant. Yeah.
Okay, is there any from anyone else on issues that we have not raised? Councillor Darcy, you were first. I can't always see you because that's right. And then Councillor Reid.
Yeah, there was just the one which was about the site we've been talking about, the school site, which was, am I to understand that the SANG is intended to be on the site, and is that actually possible?
Through you, Chairman. No, what I said was that had been looked at and is in discussion with Natural England, but what is necessary is mitigation for the impacts on Wealdon Heath's SPA. The developer, United Learning, are working with Natural England to see if it can be accommodated on the site, but what will be guaranteed is that there would need to be mitigation, whether that's on site or off site, and that was the other point that Graham Parrott was making about our further work to identify SANG, and actually Councillor Coburn quite rightly made the point that it's not just this site that needs mitigation, it's all of the sites where there's impact on the Wealdon Heath SBA, because we don't have an avoidance strategy in the same way we do for the Thames Basin Heaths area.
Councillor Darcy, you happy with that? If so, Councillor Reid, I think you had one other point.
Just really quickly to say that I think we're being very over prescriptive here, and we seem to be talking as if we're in a planning meeting. I appreciate, what the points that Councillor Coburn and Councillor Else have made, but surely, all these things that have been mentioned so far are things that we would ask maybe consultants or the appropriate bodies at the time of a planning application. It seems to me that item 5 in the recommendation is an overview of all the things that we've said, and we could change. Those are the times when things could be changed, or maybe should be changed. I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Obviously, you said it's like being in a planning committee. Well, of course, these are the planning policies and the planning document that we will be basing our planning decisions on. So, we absolutely have to do that. Our recommendations are saying these are our observations, these are our comments that we want to raise to the executive and the council. Our comments may be totally ignored, they could be totally taken on board. So, the point of scrutiny is to say, this is what we think when we've scrutinised it, and there'll be other issues that we haven't raised, and there'll be some issues that will be very easily answered, but our role is just to highlight them, and the officers will take them on board. Councillor Coburn,
Well, the point I'm trying to make in all of this, and the point I'm always trying to uphold in a planning meeting, is consistency, fairness, clarity, transparency, all these issues that we hold dear. And therefore, if you're putting forward sites, for example, we were grilled, for the neighbourhood plan twice at examination in public, and then in the courts. And the reason that they didn't get, or the neighbourhood plan passed the test, was because we had the evidence for why we had chosen the sites. We had the robust criteria that we judged all the sites against, and there was no fear or favour. And in fact, when we had done our sites, and I said to the examiner, what was going to happen if we had any sites that we were swithering on, the independent planning consultant would choose them. because, you know, we didn't want any bias whatsoever to be apparent. And you can only do that by grilling, by having the, you know, the evidence there that you can drill down to. Now, if the evidence is there, then I have no problem with anything we do. If we've been fair and honest and open with everybody, then I have absolutely no problem at all. All I'm trying to do at this meeting is see whether or not we have been consistent and fair and transparent, because without that, we are not a good planning authority and our decisions will be questioned. So, you know, this is a planning meeting for, if you think about it, it's more important than some of the other ones we go to, because we have to get policy right and then we have to apply policy correctly. If we don't do that, we fail.
Absolutely agree, and that's our role. As if you look at the good guide to scrutiny, we've done exactly what that says, and it may be uncomfortable, and a couple of people have been in a slight firing line, but actually we followed the good guide to probity in scrutiny, so I'm more than happy with that. So we'll get in, we've got 5 minutes, and so I want to make a suggestion for a change in the recommendations. So the current recommendations, if you look at there's 5 recommendations. Just want to check everybody has got that in their agenda, they can see that. What my suggestion is going to be is that we have a very simple recommendation tonight, because I think they are very complex, those recommendations, talking about what we think should happen with certain annexes. Well, we haven't even discussed each one of those recommendations in detail, and I think we would take all night. So my recommendation is that we have a very simple, that the overview and scrutiny has provided comments and observations to the executive and subsequent council on local plan part 2 as follows. And then the comments that we've gone through are then attached to that. Because I think sort of talking about annexes and, you know, if I suddenly said, so what about Annex 6? What do you think the issues are? You know, you'd be all night. And I don't think you can recommend something if we haven't discussed it or fully understand it. People's views, are people happy with that chairman's amendment? Okay, so Mark will type those out. Obviously that will be tomorrow, and hopefully once they're done, Mark, if you can ping them across to the members who've sat through it tonight, just in case there's any glaring errors, but it's all on YouTube, so there shouldn't be. We have a record of what's been said. So I think we've probably done this with 4 minutes to spare. Has anybody got any closing comments they want to make before I close the meeting? Councillor Reid.
Yes, I'd just like this plan is past time, but it has to be used, and it's maybe has to be used and change. And there's a lot of time between now and so, you know, we mustn't get too, you know, heated up.
Now you're right, there's going to be many changes. You know, who would have thought we've gone through the last 2 years as we have, and how that's changed everything. But we've done what we've supposed to do, that's scrutinise what's in front of us today. And yes, I'm sure it will change, but we've done what we had to do today. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. I was looking at the original recommendations as set out in the report. I take your point about including the matters that have been discussed. I obviously have reservations about one of them. I don't need to tell you which one, but I will not object to taking all the recommendations together. But I did want to ask a technical question. 4 and 5 recommendations. I'm wondering if technically it would be helpful to leave them in, because we are effectively recommending the head of planning and economic development is given some authority over some matters. And I think that's something maybe for Zach, through you, Chairman.
Okay, I can see where you're coming from. To my view is that will be a decision that the council will take tomorrow. As a scrutiny, I don't think we're in the position to make decisions on behalf of the council, and that's effectively what that recommendation does. So I think your point is well made, but that's what tomorrow those recommendations will be agreed by council, and therefore the authority is granted by the full council meeting. We can't grant that authority for Zach to do it. So I think by saying, here's our observations and our comments, they can be fed in, and in the wider debate tomorrow, firstly executive, who have got to approve those recommendations, then at full council, and then I think that will come. But we as much as it makes sense, that's beyond the role of scrutiny committee. I absolutely understand the point, because it's going to happen, but we're not the right people to endorse that. In my view, we haven't got that authority.
Yeah, can I just say, I'm sorry, I have to agree to disagree with you on that, but.
Okay, well, that's never a bad thing. Councillor Wojciechowski.
No, Chairman, I think your point is well made, and I think the way the recommendations were laid out, it can get confusing, because you're thinking, oh, this is what we are actually agreeing to tonight, and that's the fact it's not. It has to come from full council as to what decisions are made, and that happens tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. So I've got Councillor Darcy and then Mark to wrap up any other issues.
Yeah, sorry, it's just a quick one to say that the recommendations as they're laid out, I found quite difficult to understand, to be quite honest. I had to read them about half a dozen times. So it would be nice. I appreciate it's very difficult to do, but it'd be nice if we could in future have ones that you could actually read and understand the first time you read them. Thanks.
Totally agree, which is why I had to use chairman's discretion to change it to something we understood, or something I understood. Mark, is there anything before? Because we're 1 minute over.
So just to say what the recommendation here, the original recommendation in the report says, is to provide comments and observations on those. So in a manner of speaking, that's what you've done. You've just not gone through point by point and addressed them. Yeah. But that's within your discretion to do that. I just wanted to check, Chair, you mentioned, I think we can give the requests about Hazelmere Town Council and the percentage on the sites as actions to the planning team rather than as recommendations. Yep. Did you want to have, in addition to the main recommendation, did you also want to have one about the gap between meetings being longer in future?
I thought you raised that in the first point about the. Yeah. I thought it was your point one about. Yeah. And we could add, and in future there must be sufficient time between meetings to ensure proper scrutiny and time to do the research and look at the issues raised. Because otherwise some of those issues we might not resolve by tomorrow, and you'll be voting on issues that you actually haven't got answers to. So if you would like to expand, I think it's a point well done. Okay, my apologies, we're 2 minutes over by my clock, but I have to say I think it's been a very, very robust discussion, which is what scrutiny is about. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for the work you've put in going through the documents. We'll be doing it again tomorrow night. So safe journey home, everybody. Meeting